Do it.
Do it.
Welcome to the Austin Otaku Podcast, hosted by Jesse McDonald and Keith Good.
Welcome back to the Austin Otaku Podcast, everyone. My name is Jesse McDonald, and joined yet again by the absolutely haunting Keith Good.
Boo. Boo.
I love how unenthusiastic the first boo was. Boo.
What can I say? If I'm haunting, does that mean I'm dead? How enthusiastic could I be as a dead person?
Oh, that's fair. I've really appreciated that this segment over the month of with Halloween has turned into is that positive or negative?
It's hard to say.
Yeah. In my mind, it's positive, but that's just me. How you doing, buddy?
Well, I am well, and TGIF as always. But
as
also,
always,
this is a specifically a terrifically great time right now because not only is it Halloween weekend, but we are almost done with the election cycle. I'm so excited.
Next week will either be a breath of fresh air and relief or dread. Absolute dread.
Mm-hmm.
No comment on what that means, but if you're smart, you should know.
How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm really good. Again, and I think this has been recurring for, what's this, episode 15? For at least 10 of these episodes. Busy, but good.
I think we started on episode 1, and you were busy. So.
Oh, well, I've remained busy for at least 15 plus weeks,
exactly.
So this is good. Well, very excited because our guest this week is fellow IBMer and otaku Jim Braden. He's a content director for IBM Systems, a blogger, and a fantasy writer, as well as a Star Wars and Transformers superfan, which I super appreciate. His collection of action figures and memorabilia will humble many fans. He's the only person to have a dedicated seat at the Alamo Drafthouse, thanks to his winning a Star Wars viewing marathon of 46 hours and 5 minutes. The feat earned him an appearance in The Hollywood Reporter, The Daily Mail, comicbook.com, Birth, Movies, Death, and many others. Keith and I are excited about this episode because under ordinary non-pandemic circumstances, we regularly stop by Jim's desk at work to chat about nerdy things, which we typically like to call our West Wing walk as we kind of walk the floor that the three of us sit on. So with that, welcome to the show, Jim Braden.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here, man. So for the listeners out there, tell us a little bit about yourself, both personally and professionally.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the boring stuff. Professionally, I am a content director at IBM. So I primarily work on marketing videos pertaining to our client success stories. So that's a lot of fun. That lets me scratch my film making itch, which going back in my career, I did start in Hollywood. I worked on a lot of film productions. I worked in script development, special effects, post-production, a little bit of everything, and left that behind to move to sunny Austin, Texas, and eventually through a weird chain of circumstances found my way back to filmmaking. So that's pretty good.
That's awesome. And I don't know if our BCGs, what is that? Yeah. Business kind of got, if our BCGs require us all three currently to say the thoughts and opinions of all three of these employees of IBM are not a reflection of IBM themselves.
Very much so.
No secret talk here.
We're all not going to get fired now. Yay.
Covered my rear. That's great that you started out in Hollywood. You're the second person in 2 weeks that we've talked to who has something to do with the entertainment industry or had something to do with the entertainment industry. So that's fantastic. Anything notable in that resume you want to talk about in terms of films you worked on?
Well, mostly near misses with good films and a lot of heavy involvement with bad ones.
There seems to be a common denominator there, man.
Yeah. The bad ones involve being Mick G, the director. If you're old enough to remember him, he created the OC. He did a couple of terrible movies, and he did a film called Charlie's Angels. And I wasn't fortunate enough to work on that one. I got to work on Charlie's Angels 2,
Oh no!
which is so much worse. So that was that was sort of my low point in Hollywood, and that was pretty much right before I left. But before that, I worked in script development, and I did have some legitimate near misses with awesome outcomes there. I looked at an early draft of Blade Runner 2, which at the time was called Blade Runner Down, and I actually fished that out of the recycle pile as an intern at my first internship. And I liked Blade Runner. I read the script, and I was like, this is really good. And so I gave it to my boss, who was the assistant to the director of development, and he liked it, and he passed it to her. She passed it up to the VP of production. It went to our principal producers. They ended up liking it enough to fly the author, Stuart Hazeldine, who is now a working screenwriter, flew him in from the UK. He was a no-name at the time, and they actually took him in to pitch the script. The studio was on board, and I fished it out of the recycle pile on a Monday morning, and on Friday afternoon it got sent to Harrison Ford for his weekend read.
Wow.
Which was pretty cool. And of course he said hell no, didn't want to do it because he didn't need the money the way he does now. So,
are there anything that made it into 2049 that was in that script?
So there was a series of books that were, this is back, sort of, not to get ahead of ourselves with the Star Wars EU, but they were considered the official sequel to Blade Runner.
They're right there on my shelf.
Yeah, what's the guy's name? K.D. Jeter or something like that?
K.W. Jeter.
K.W. Jeter. And those were considered like the official, sequels to the film. And they're not great, but there was enough material there. Again, sort of like the Star Wars EU, things are creeping their way back into the canon. It was the same deal there, where there were certain ideas that were in those books that did make their way into Blade Runner Down, which was more of a literal adaptation of was it Replicant Dawn? I can't remember what the first of the books was.
Replicant Night.
Replicant, man, I'm so close with
You're really close.
But some of those made it into that script, and then that script led to a couple different rewrites. There were a bunch of different versions of it that floated around, and there are some elements I think that informed 2049, but nothing directly from it. But
interesting.
It led to good things for the writer, because he ended up, he got representation, and then he started getting some work. So I think he's still out there.
Totally.
Hard to know. It's been a while.
That's awesome.
So replicant gambling is what we got in 2049. They just went to Vegas.
They just went to Vegas.
Blade Runner,
the
Vegas
script
vacation.
has taken a beating. It's not what it used to be.
That's awesome. So one thing that we mentioned in your intro, which I have found extremely fascinating, is your Star Wars marathon, which has gotten you a dedicated seat at the Alamo Drafthouse. And for those not in Texas or lucky enough to be in an area with a draft house, it's an awesome movie theater. They serve food, drinks, everything. High quality film. Definitely check it out if you're in an area that has one. But can you talk to us a little bit about what that entailed and kind of what it's like being someone with a dedicated seat?
Sure. Well, so the Draft House, they've always done different events like this, but they were looking at this as being a pretty big opportunity to get tied in with all the hype around the sequel trilogy. So they announced far and wide that they were doing, this marathon. It was basically they were going to show the existing 6 movies in sequence, all being followed up by the premiere of episode 7. And then for the people who were part of the contest, they would stay in the theater, and every subsequent showing of Force Awakens, they would stay in the theater until basically everyone passed out and there was only one person standing. And so they put out the call on Facebook and Instagram and all that, trying to see, show us how big of a fan you are. Like, who's the biggest Star Wars fan? And they were going to get 7 of us. And the contest was open to any citizens of any state that had a draft house in it. So they were going to fly people in. They made it a pretty big deal, and they got a lot of good sort of viral attention off of it. But anyway, I put in for it. I showed off my collection and just sort of said, big Star Wars fan. And I got called. And so they invited me in to participate. They were originally looking for 7 people, and then a couple of the people from out of state that they had, awarded a spot to ended up falling through. So there were just 5 of us. And so we showed up, I think it was 4:45 a.m. On the day before. Well, I guess it was the day of the premiere of the movie. But they started Phantom Menace at 4:45 so that they would finish at exactly the time when they were allowed to premiere episode 7. So yeah, by the time that rolled around, everybody was pretty psyched just to see the premiere of the movie. And then as soon as we watched it once, it was sort of like, diminishing returns set in. It got less great. But the cool thing about it was, and again, this is one of the million reasons why I love the Drafthouse. They were cool enough that, all the contestants in the marathon were supposed to sit in a single row, and we did for the marathon itself. But the previous thing where they showed all 6 movies, that was open to the public. So those tickets sold out pretty quick, but we were watching that with a real audience. And, I had promised my son when the new one went into production, he was a little guy at the time. He was 7, I think. So he had never seen a Star Wars movie in the theater. And I said, if I ever have a kid, I'm going to take him to see, if they make another Star Wars movie, we're going to see it opening night. And so, all of a sudden this contest came along. No way I'm going to say no to that. But then I started thinking about it. And I'm like, if I do this contest, I'm not going to get to see the movie with my kid. And so the Drafthouse was really cool. And I made a special arrangement with them. I kept the seats that I already had for the marathon. And then just before episode 7 was going to premiere, my wife, drove my kid up and we swapped out. Then he got to come in. So I got to sit with him for the first showing and then got him the hell out of there. And then it sat there for the next 46 hours, watching Star Wars. So
that's awesome.
They showed it in order of the actual episode numbers themselves. But if you, you have a kid. So obviously I hear a lot of parents saying, if I ever have a kid, here's the order in which I'm going to show my kids the Star Wars movies. What is your preferred order of watching the movies?
Yeah. So are you guys familiar with the machete order or the machete cut?
Oh, I call it machete. But,
okay. I'm sorry. Well, forgive my pronunciation.
I'm just kidding.
It's a pretty cool way of doing it. I didn't do it with my son because I just wanted to start him off with the original trilogy and not get bogged down with all the prequel stuff. I don't hate the prequels at all, but it was sort of like I wanted to show him, the Star Wars. But the machete order is you start with. A lot of people say skip episode 1 entirely because it really doesn't add much to the story. And episode 2 pretty much catches you up on everything you needed to know from episode 1. But you can show episode 1. So the machete order is 1, 2, 4, 5, 3, 6. So that way you get, the origins of Anakin going up through him being an apprentice. Am I getting it right? Let me think.
That sounds right, actually.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so then you skip ahead to episode 4 where, Obi-Wan is telling Luke about his dad and about the Clone Wars and all that. And if all you have to go on is episode 2, the end of which is the beginning of the Clone Wars, you sort of in your mind, you have your own idea of what that was all about, which of course is how we grew up wondering what the hell Obi-Wan was talking about. The Clone Wars sounded interesting. Don't know anything about it. But then you watch, 4 and 5, and when you get to the Vader reveal, spoiler alert for your audience, Darth Vader is Luke's father. Then at the end of that, you jump back to episode 3, and now you see, the fall of the Republic, Order 66, Vader being born. And then you go back to watch Return of the Jedi, where you see, Vader's redemption and the end of the Empire and all that. So it's kind of a cool way of doing it. It's a little convoluted.
That's interesting. So it's supposed to almost superimpose a flashback into the cut.
Yeah.
Right. Which is kind of cool.
Interesting.
Where does the holiday special fall into that order?
Well, I mean, I think you have to have it in there at least twice. You've got to slot it in. I don't know where it's necessarily appropriate for the canon, but
you have to watch it after every single movie. Life Day is celebrated after every single movie.
Well, it's funny going back to the contest. They showed the 6 movies, and then they got up to Force Awakens, and then they showed that to us like 4 or 5 times. And by now we're into the middle of the next day, and I think it was just down to me and the other guy. So most of the people fell out pretty quick, and then I think what they were considering to be like the killer, like this is going to finish them up, was they took us into a room, just the 2 of us, and made us watch the holiday special.
Oy.
And we weren't supposed to talk to each other. We're supposed to just watch it. But, we were punch drunk. We were really overtired, and we were both super fans. And we couldn't help ourselves. And we just started, joking around about it and riffing off it and dropping trivia on each other. And it turned out to be a great thing. And they actually showed that on Periscope. And I didn't actually get to see it after the fact before it went away, but a lot of people said it was actually really fascinating because it was like a lot of good information about the holiday special. But unfortunately, it had the opposite effect of what they were going for, because we came out of that totally pumped, and now it's like, now we're buddies. Like, oh shit, let's go back in and watch the movie again. So they were like, Jesus Christ, like not what we wanted. So they ended up prolonging the contest by probably 8 hours. But eventually the other guy tapped out, and that was the end of that. So
and it was essentially a full work week plus 6 hours and 15 minutes, right? Or 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You're it's an endurance battle for sure, mentally, I imagine, more than anything, because you're basically sitting the whole time. But I love the part of the interview talking to you about that, where the guy, the last competitor, leans over to you and he asks, "You're not going to quit, are you?" and you said no, and he just like, all right, that's it, I'm done. That was
yeah. Well, it's funny. My buddy who went to the 6 movie thing, they interviewed him after the fact, and they were just like, oh, his friend, they interviewed him just to find out more about like me and the contest, and his quote was like, they weren't prepared for him. And it's true. No, what's funny is they did, like, I looked into marathons beforehand. I was like, I wanted to know more about like how people have gotten through these kinds of things before, and I found an article talking about the Simpsons for the 500th episode had a marathon where they were just going to show every Simpsons episode, and then if somebody managed to somehow make it through them all, they would start showing them again. And it was an entire theater full of people, and it was like whoever was left was going to get $10,000 and whatever. And so same kind of thing. Most people tapped out, relatively early, and then there were 2 people who, both of them were just like, I'm going to win this. And so at the time, the world record for sitting watching a TV show was like 78 hours or something. And they both, like, they went the distance, and finally, like, the people running the contest were worried about their health, because they were like, these people were not doing well. And as soon as they broke the world record, they called the contest and said, you both win. And that was the end of that. But coming out of that, like, the one girl had burst blood vessels in her eyes.
Oh, wow.
From having her eyes open so long. The other guy, like, hallucinated. I mean, it was like they were reporting some pretty horrific things. But I was like, if there's any fan base that's geekier than Simpsons fans, it's Star Wars fans. So if you're going to get these people in there, like, everybody is going to be playing to win. So in my mind, I'm thinking, like, okay, this is going to go at least 70 hours. And so the fact that it came in at like 46, like, it seems like a lot, but you have to know where my head was at. Like, I expected it to be so much longer than that I sort of like paced myself, I guess, like, mentally.
Theoretically, you got off easy.
I did. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the psychological effect. Like you said, sitting, I have no problem sitting for 46 hours. That's not a challenge. I'm a very sedentary person. But, mentally, it's like, even watching a marathon of different stuff would have been one thing, but watching the same thing again and again was like, it's hard to explain what happens to the mind, but like time folds in on itself. Like sequences from the movie that I really liked, like the Millennium Falcon, the finding the Falcon, and like, that little TIE fighter chase that happens on Jakku, on the desert planet. That was a great sequence. It got me super stoked the first time I saw it. And then every time I watch the movie, I'm like, I've got to sit through the parts that aren't as good just to get to the parts that I liked. And then those parts are on for 3 minutes and then it's over. And I'm like, well, I'll see it again in 3 hours. But then it started to feel like I just watched this like a half an hour ago. So all of a sudden time stopped making sense.
See, it's funny. I think I've told you this before. I used to work at a screen printing shop right after college. And that whole group was just really interesting. We would watch movies or like shit like Tim and Eric. So, I mean, like, we were already screwed up. But we would listen to music, and sometimes we would do what we would call repeat offs, where we would start a song, just hit it on loop and see how long we could go. And our record was like 2 full work days of listening to, I think, Possum Kingdom by the Toadies. But I mean, we did several like really crazy ones. And I think one time we made it 10 hours off of Stand Up and Shout off of the Rockstar soundtrack, and we're getting physically ill. So no, I get it. I totally get where that kind of screws with your body. We just watched all of Trapped in the Closet one time, and people were throwing up by the end of that.
Just once.
Just one time. I don't think we finished all 52 parts, but yeah, that was pretty horrible.
Yeah. Hey, you watched The Force Awakens, the episode 7 Force Awakens, 10 times during this marathon. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or you got into the 10th time?
We had just started the 10th show, and that was when the guy leaned over and he was like, he was about done. And then he was like, that was when he asked, like, "You're not going to quit, are you?" I'm like, "No." And I meant it, and he was like, "Oh shit. All right, I'm done." Like, that was it. He literally couldn't, like, again, mentally, I think he just couldn't, like, I cannot believe I'm going to watch this goddamn movie again. And I was pretty close to the breaking point, but like, I'm stubborn. I wasn't going to, they would have had to wheel me out of there, I think, for me to quit.
No. And I think what really sucks is that you watched the special edition versions of the original trilogy, right?
Yeah, well, of course, that's all that exists anymore, so they say.
Yeah, fair.
Oh no, well, not legally. Legally, that's all that legally exists anymore.
I can direct your listeners to easily the best fan versions of the original trilogy.
We've talked about them already. We've got them.
Oh my God.
Well, okay. Which ones do you have? What have you talked about?
The despecialized.
Okay, a lot of people say that is not actually the best one.
Where's another one?
You got to find the Adywan, and it's Adyawan.
Okay.
He actually went in, and this sounds like sacrilege, but he went in and not only fixed a bunch of stuff and did the color correction. He got rid of the matte lines. Like, he did a lot of stuff that cleaned up the movies, but he ended up adding some of his own stuff, and it's amazing. Like, the Death Star scenes in the original Star Wars, they don't really have establishing shots outside the Death Star. After they show it a couple of times, you go right from, Luke and Leia, whatever they're doing. And then there's like those terrible, like, Happy Days wipes that take you back into the Death Star. But you don't really have those big establishing shots. And the guy went in and he put these things in there, and they're fantastic. And it really does give you that, that scene transition that the movie, you didn't realize it was missing it until you see what he did. And it's like, that's what that needed. And then he did Empire Strikes Back, and like, he fan sources these, like, people send him, $25-$30. Then he's always updating, like, "Oh, we made some costumes today. We built some new miniatures," and like, the guy is no joke. And so Empire Strikes Back, I think it took him the better part of like 6 or 7 years to actually get it done after he did A New Hope. And he put it out probably 2 years ago now, I think. And he added all the stuff to the Battle of Hoth, where it was like, you see snowtroopers rappelling down the side of an AT-AT, like the side of the AT-AT opens up. You can find the trailer and all the stuff that's on there. He has a scene where, when who blows it up? I can't remember. I think it's Luke, actually. Whoever shoots the AT-AT, and then it just falls over on its side.
That was Wedge.
Was it Wedge?
Or no, that was the
Wedge
the harpoon.
Wedge did the tie-ups. Yeah.
I
can't remember who.
I don't remember who shot that. I don't know if it was just a snow speeder that did it.
Yeah. But anyway, it tips over on its side, and he actually went in there and digitally, and really good effects, put in one of the little chicken walkers, the little ATSTs, and he had it walking alongside the AT-AT. And you see that in one shot from behind the AT-AT, and you see this little guy come walking into frame, on the side. And then they cut to the front view as the AT-AT keels over, and the little chicken walker looks up like, "Oh shit!" And pushes the flat. And it's like they turned that into a laugh scene, but it really worked. So I'm just endlessly impressed by those movies. And the thing that made me a real fan of his was there's a moment, and it's, since I was a little kid watching it on HBO, drove me absolutely nuts. The scene when when Leia, Lando, 3PO, and Chewie are racing for the Falcon. Han's been frozen and taken away, and now they're trying to make their getaway from Cloud City. And it's like, Lando's shooting and Leia's shooting. The stormtroopers are coming, and C-3PO is on Chewie's back, and they're like, come on, get on the ship. And Chewie turns around with 3PO on his back, and 3PO's head hits the side of the Millennium Falcon, and there's a little red landing light on the side, and he knocks it off a little bit. So it's like, it totally, for me, like, once you see it, it's like the stormtrooper hitting his head. Like, once you see it, I could never look away. And I'm watching the movie, and I'm about halfway through it, and I'm like, man, if he fixes that, like, that would be the most amazing thing ever, because it's something that only an obsessive, like, I have to do everything.
Yeah.
And it got to that scene, and I swear to God, I cheered. I'm sitting in my office alone watching the movie, and I was like, oh my God, he did it. He actually fixed that. So that's, man, I'm a huge fan. And so now he's doing Return of the Jedi, and it'll probably take him 20 years to do it, but I'm there for it.
I'll have to look that up.
Put them down, the Adywan edits.
Adywan.
Definitely throw us a link to that, because I'm going to check that out for sure.
I will indeed.
The first time I watched the Despecialized after my buddy burnt them for me, it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. This is so good.
Yeah.
So good.
Well, what's funny about the Blu-rays they put out of the original trilogy, I mean, not only are they the special editions with all the crap added in, but the color correction is awful on it. They're so dark. Luke's lightsaber, like when Luke fires up his lightsaber in the Millennium Falcon that first time when Obi-Wan's going to train him, like his lightsaber is white, like it's barely even blue, it's just white. And if you're going to go in and redo the special effects and add a bunch of crap like Jabba's band and all this stuff, at least fix the color of the lightsaber. Like, come on, this is like low hanging fruit. And he just didn't do it. He fixed all the wrong things. Why is Luke screaming when he is, deliberately falling down the pit and he has to scream? Like, come on.
Yeah, at least he didn't do the McClunky thing that Disney did.
Yeah, what is that?
I have no idea. No idea.
Now that we have hit that point where we are in pure tangent mode, we're also at the halfway point, which means that we are at our otaku recommendation section. So, tell me something good. Tell me something good. So, starting off, Jim, what's your recommendation for the viewers or listeners?
Well, I would recommend, and again, not to take your audience away from you guys, but there's another podcast. It's Bill Simmons, so it's part of the Ringer Network, but it's called The Rewatchables, and he has a panel of 4 or 5 people. That's it's a rotating panel, but basically they go back and find the movies from the 70s, 80s, 90s that they consider to be just the kind of movies where if you're flipping through the channels and you come across that movie, no matter where you are in the movie, you're going to sit there and finish the movie because it's that good and you've seen it a million times and it's worth revisiting. And, they'll spend a good hour and a half, like diving into these movies. They do, internet research. So they're dropping trivia. They all just talk about their favorite things, what worked, what didn't, casting what ifs. So there's a lot of really good stuff in there, and they pick fantastic movies, and it's like they're in my head. Like when I'm listening to them talking about the movies, I'm like, oh, I wonder if they know this, and then they'll say that. It's kind of amazing, but it's really super entertaining, very funny.
That's
Indeed.
awesome.
Per your recommendation, I did listen to their most recent, well, not most recent, but the Teen Wolf one. That was a lot of fun.
Teen Wolf was hilarious because again, it's the Ringer Network is a sports network. Bill Simmons is a sports guy. They all are, and so they spent about 15 minutes talking about the wolf makeup and the plot, and they spent the rest of the time dissecting how bad the basketball was.
Exactly.
It was really funny. Like what college would have recruited the Teen Wolf?
The sad thing is, as bad as Michael J. Fox was at playing basketball, I kept thinking he's better than me.
Yeah.
Fair.
I could watch that movie today and have no problem with the basketball because I don't know what I'm looking at. It's like, well, there's a basketball. They're on a court.
Sports ball.
Or sports ball.
B-ball Wolfman.
How about you, Jesse? What do you got this week for us?
So, since this is the last week of October, I am going to finish off the Halloween theme and recommend a movie that's been incredibly important to my life. And in many ways, even before I was born. So that movie would be the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So for those of you that know me, you probably know that my parents have been together since they were 16, very similar to myself and my wife. And when they were younger, they would go see Rocky Horror. So did the experience dressed up, threw shit at the screen, all that jazz. So very early on in my life, Rocky Horror came into my conscious. So every year we always, when we can, try to go see it in public. So we get the whole, theater experience. And if not, we watch it. So this year we're going to take Joy trick-or-treating at their house and we're going to watch Rocky Horror. But simultaneously, I wanted to recommend it because not only is it just an amazing piece of pop culture, it's also incredibly important, especially to like the LGBTQ community. It's huge. The entire message of the movie is don't dream it, be it. Just be yourself. So I think especially with the way things are right now, it's important to have those positive bits of representation in media. So that one's a huge one for me, and I think for a lot of other people. So I wanted to recommend it. If you haven't seen it, it's bizarre, but it's great.
It is bizarre, but it is great. And you're right. I think it is best viewed in a public setting, in those crazy little things where people come dressed up and they throw pieces of bread at each other and hot dogs and, all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
My absolute favorite is that people get so intense with it and just memorize all the special call outs and stuff that there's inevitably going to be that one guy in the audience that does every single call out and some extra ones, but sounds so unenthusiastic. Like he is there and he's been doing this for years and this is just what he does. Yeah. So, yeah, definitely go see that.
Let's do the time warp again.
So, Keith, what's yours this week?
I'm going to recommend a local author, Amber Fisher. She's actually written several books, but I have only read a few of the books. It's kind of funny. One of her books is no longer available, so it's now worth $907.99. But a book that you can still buy at a reasonable price is called A Soul to Take. It is based here in Austin, of course, and it follows the thoughts and actions of a raven who is basically not really death, but it's sort of like in Japan they have things called Shinigami or soul reapers. He's a soul reaper. So definitely recommend Amber Fisher's A Soul to Take. She's got a new series that has come out as of late called Rest in Power Necromancy, and that includes Rites of Passage, Dreaming Down the Bones, Temple of the Inner Flame. But yeah, she's a fun writer. I enjoy her work, and I figure A Soul to Take is the perfect Halloween book to read. And that is our recommendations for this week. Good job, guys.
Tell me something good.
Very nice. I am currently adding the book to my Amazon wish list as we speak.
Yeah, I love supporting local folks.
No doubt. No doubt.
So, Jim, you and I, and Jesse actually, right after the trailer for the latest of the episodes of Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, we sat down in the office together in a room and we said, well, let's discuss it for the next 10 minutes. And then we ended up talking for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
I think we're not ashamed to admit this because it's been over a year, so statute of limitations is gone. I'm pretty sure I skipped a couple of meetings for this.
So it was a great time, I think, for all of us geeks to sit down and talk. And we didn't just talk about the Rise of Skywalker preview, but we talked about Transformers and other things. But in the interim, we have had a wonderful show that has hit the airwaves on Disney Plus called The Mandalorian. And obviously, you and I have both watched that. And episode 9 came out this morning at around 3 a.m. I didn't get up that early to watch it, but it's a good show. I like it. What do you think about The Mandalorian? What are your favorite parts of it? What are your least favorite parts of it?
I mean, I think it's fantastic. I think it's exactly what fans, and I hesitate to say like fans as if there's one type, because I think a lot of people wanted different things. But I think like from our age group, what we wanted was, we wanted what felt like grown up Star Wars that had all of the elements that we would recognize and feel comfortable with, but in a new setting, like feeling like the timeline had advanced. I don't know that the sequel trilogy did that very well. I felt like it was a lot of fan service with no payoff. The Mandalorian, it feels like all the fan service is earned and it all makes sense, and it's earned a place in the narrative, so nothing feels forced. I like the idea of the Imperial Remnant. I like the idea that the Republic, it's not like the good guys won at the end of Return of the Jedi and now everything's cool. And it's not like the sequel trilogy where like nothing changed. Like there's still an empire. Everything is still terrible. Like there's no forward momentum. Here it feels like you're at a place in between where it's like, yeah, the established government fell and everything is in complete chaos. And the New Republic is like trying to get things back on track. But everybody's sort of like, yeah, well, I mean, it's easy to knock a government over. It's hard to build one. Yeah. And so, especially on the Outer Rim, like everything is just kind of shitty and lawless. And I feel like The Mandalorian, is perfectly representative of that. And I like the scum and villainy, style of the show where he's running around with lowlives and, doing dirty jobs. There's no idea of like saving the galaxy. There's no epic good versus evil. It's like, it's just dudes trying to get by in a lawless moment in time. And you either love Baby Yoda or you hate him. Sorry, the child. And he like, I'm a little worried about that. I haven't watched the new episode either. I am worried that he's going to introduce, a save the world angle where all of a sudden it's going to be, all the important characters are going to show up. Boba Fett maybe going to show up. They tease that. there's things that make me nervous that they're going to blow the story up, to a larger scale. But I would much rather see it just stick to, the low level stuff. I love the episode where they do the jailbreak, and they go into that ship. And that wasn't like a mythology episode, that didn't really do anything on its own to drive the story forward, but it was such a great heist. Like if you ever played like the Star Wars role-playing game or any role-playing game and you thought about playing it in the Star Wars universe, like that's what you would play. Of course, you're going to have this random group of like alien guys with different, skill sets, like the big Deveronian guy who had 18 strength, he's your muscle. He's your fighter. And it was so great to see. And it was sort of like, you almost don't care how it turned out because it was so much fun along the way. But then of course, now the Imperial remnant's coming back into it and the guy has the dark saber. Like there's all those good EU tie-ins and ties into the bigger mythos. That's what's going to keep people coming back, I think.
I think so too. You have to insert some of those things to sort of get people to go, oh, I saw that in Rebels or I saw that in Clone Wars. And that's so cool that you brought that in. And I just want to be clear. I don't know if I've read anything definitively saying they're definitely bringing back Boba Fett, but they certainly are bringing back Temuera Morrison, which could be Boba Fett, but it could also be one of millions of different clone troopers as well. So we'll see how that works out.
Well, it wasn't just idle speculation about Boba Fett coming back, because there is a little bit of an Easter egg at the end of the episode where they're on Tatooine, where you see a pair of feet walk up and you hear the spurs. That's like Boba Fett's thing. You
hear the spurs, but they don't necessarily. Yeah, exactly. They do.
Maybe
a
somebody
lot of
just found his shoes.
Yeah, somebody found his shoes. That's the thing about Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. They know this universe better than anybody, and they're going to do things to sort of, I don't know, mess with the fans sometimes, perhaps. We'll see. Yep. Yeah, I'm really excited. I got up early this morning and I watched the latest episode. And there are no spoilers here at all, but I was excited to see both a fat Weequay and a skinny Gamorrean in this. That doesn't give anything away. We also discovered that the thing that the Tusken Raider was saying when he attacked Luke Skywalker in Episode 4 was, "Hey, come get your dinner." So
you said no spoilers. Come on, man.
That's not a spoiler, but when you see it, you'll be like, "Oh my God, he's right."
That's hilarious.
So you mentioned something when you referred to the child, or Baby Yoda, as pop culture has called it. Who the hell hates Baby Yoda?
Agreed.
I think it's the same people who hate Ewoks and Porgs and anything cute that they put into the franchise.
Bastards.
I mean, I think people just don't want cute in their Star Wars, and they feel, but people forget, they always act like this stuff is a new thing. Like, oh, stupid Porgs, who wants this cute crap? It's like, did you ever see Return of the Jedi? Like, the Ewoks were the original cute crap. And love them or hate them, they're part of the DNA. That's part of what Star Wars is from the beginning. Like, you don't have to like everything about Star Wars, and some of that stuff is, it's merch, man. They're just looking to sell merch.
Oh, totally.
Episode 4 had Jawas. Episode 5 had the Ugnaughts. Episode 6 had the Ewoks. I mean, come on. Cuteness is in the DNA of Star Wars.
Well, I think that Baby Yoda was like the cuteness that we didn't know we needed. Like, no one ever. I don't think Yoda showed up in Empire Strikes Back and people were like, I wonder what he looked like when he was a baby. I'll bet that was cute. Like, who the hell thinks about that? So for them to bring in this character, like, I could not have been more surprised. And like, in this day and age, that's damn hard to keep something that many people were involved in creating, to keep that a secret from getting out somehow online, that like, yeah, there's a Baby Yoda, Nobody had any idea that was going to happen. So I was like, holy shit. Like, when I knew it from behind, from the ears coming up into frame, it was like, oh my God, that's a Yoda. That's, oh man, there couldn't have been a better hook in terms of like blowing up the internet.
And James Hibbard last week on our show was talking about, as a reporter who was given access to an early showing of the episode, he mentioned that they digitally removed any instance of Baby Yoda from that viewing so that it wouldn't slip, it wouldn't sneak out in any way, shape, or form. So obviously they were keeping that very, very close to them. So until we all saw it and we're like, oh, Baby Yoda.
And for those listening that like Baby Yoda, go listen to Werner Herzog's interview where they ask him about it. It's so wonderful. It's the
so
most
beautiful.
honest
It's
thing.
heartbreaking.
It's so heartbreakingly beautiful. It's so good. So this is an exciting part for me because not only am I a Star Wars fan and we talk about Star Wars and general nerdy shit that we like in the office, but it's very rare that I ever get to meet another human being that has a similar passion, if not a greater passion, for G1 Transformers like I do. So meeting you when I started IBM was exciting. So tell us a little bit about your Transformers collection.
Well, I do have a representative collection. I have so they make the masterpiece Transformers. These are like Japan, super expensive ones that are like very, very faithful to the show.
They're amazing.
They're amazing. And so my goal was to get the entire ARC crew. You know what I'm talking about? The first batch of Autobots, and then
pre-movie.
Pre-movie, pre-season 2, where like Hoist and Grapple and all those guys showed up. This is like the core guys. And so I made it a quest to get, the best version, because there's a bunch of knockoff companies that make their own versions of them too. But to find the best versions of each of those characters and have like a nice display of just the G1 good guys and bad guys.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I could not be a bigger fan of G1 Transformers. I just remember that show coming out in the midst of like, the GoBots was the cheap, knockoff thing. And like, if you go back and watch that, Transformers has not held up great. I know it's sort of sacrilege. It feels like an 80s cartoon. The guys are miscolored and they use the wrong voices and mouths move when nobody's talking. It's all the typical cheap animation stuff. But if you watch that alongside GoBots and imagine these two things being in the market at the same time, targeting like 4th and 5th graders, like there's no contest.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Transformers is like legit sci-fi. Like,
I've never met anyone with a Leader 1 tattoo on their arm. Plenty of Optimus Primes out there, but no Leader 1s.
Come on, pour one out for Leader 1. Cop Tour was pretty cool, I will say that.
Cop Tour was pretty cool.
He was the GoBots version of Soundwave.
I've got no problem saying that I did watch some GoBots when I was a kid, but G1 Transformers, and I watched it as G2, where they enhanced it with CGI a little bit, which is really bad. You should go watch that if you haven't. So
I dropped out after the movie, the animated movie. I felt like that was a nice.
Really, you haven't watched past that?
Oh, I've watched it, but as a kid, I was I saw the movie,
fair.
And then they came back and did like season 3, and it was like now following the characters from the movie. But I didn't give a shit about the characters from the movie. I liked it. I liked their adventure, but at the end, it was sort of like, you end the movie where it's like, people doing a dance number on Cybertron. Hey, we're free, we win. Like, where are you going to go from there?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think I've spoken of my grievances with George Lucas and Indiana Jones in the past, which is why I've never watched Indiana Jones. The same thing for the later seasons of Transformers. Why the hell would I want to watch someone who is responsible for the death of Optimus Prime be the leader of the Autobots? Screw that.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. There's a great video that's the rude awakening of Optimus Prime. If you look it up on YouTube, that's pretty great. He wakes up and is like, "What the fuck happened? Ironhide! Oh shit! What are you doing?" It's really, really funny. But yeah, he definitely blames Hot Rod for everything.
Good, as he should. That's
he doesn't let him off the hook at all.
That's hilarious. It's like our show is basically the Seth Green show from Adult Swim.
Robot Chicken?
Robot Chicken,
yeah.
Because it's all Star Wars and Transformers here, essentially.
Yeah.
So makes that show great.
It is. It really does make that show fantastic. You, speaking of fantasy worlds, because, obviously we've talked about 2 different universes of fantasy worlds, or they could be the same for all we know, just different points in time. A lot of people say Star Wars is our future.
Good point.
You actually write a little bit of fantasy yourself.
I do.
Yeah,
that is true.
You got this. You've got an ebook out there, "The Tower and the Gate." Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was a story that I've been wanting to write since maybe junior year of high school. I came up with the world and the basic plot, and then I put it all together over one summer and brought it back to school, I guess my junior year of high school, as a D&D campaign for my friends. And so I played them through the plot, and for me, it was like pressure testing the story. letting them have their contributions as their characters. And then at the end of it all, I was like, I'm going to write this as a book. But I was 16 years old, and I knew if I wrote a book, it was going to be derivative and crappy. And so I took the entire binder of all my notes. Like, I have dictaphone tapes of myself, like, sort of summarizing, sessions of the game and everything, what happened. Then I put the entire thing on the shelf, and I said, I'll come back to this in 10 years. And if I still think it's a good idea, then I'll write it as a book. And so I put it on the shelf, and I never stopped thinking about it. And I did mature. That was when I moved to Hollywood. I started working in script development. I learned a lot about story, a lot about character. And I went back to the binder, and I still really thought there was something there. So I wrote the book of the first. It would ultimately end up being like 9 books total. But I wrote the first book, and I put it out there, and I tried to see if anybody would pick it up. And I didn't get very far with that, and I started looking into self-publishing. And so I found a guy on DeviantArt to do cover art for the book. And so I reached out to him. I worked with him a little bit, put together a cover, and then I put it up on Facebook. And I said, look, I don't love the title of the book. I still don't love the title of the book, Tower of the Gates, pretty generic. But I said, if you saw this book on the shelf, like, which of these titles would you think would be the most compelling to you? And so I put them all out there, and a lot of people started voting on it and all that. Well, of course, one of my buddies from high school ended up seeing the post, and he happened to be the guy who played the main character in the campaign. And he's like, hey, send me your book. I'd be interested to see it. And he said, I'm not going to promise anything, but my wife is a lit agent. She represents authors, young adult, post-apocalyptic fantasy, steampunk kind of stuff. And like, he couldn't have identified the keywords that better described the book. Mm-hmm. And he's like, send it to me. I'll take a look. If it holds up or feels like it would be good, then I'll give it to her. Can't promise anything. She'll take a look at it. She'll be honest. She's not going to waste her time on something that's not good. But you never know. And so, this went on for like 6 months. Eventually she did read it. She gave me a lot of notes, said I should take the book, split it in half. And I did all that, and I brought it back to her with all of her notes implemented, and she said, I'll take you on as a client. And so now she has my book. She's shopping it around. I haven't found a home for it yet, but it just blows my mind that my buddy from high school who played the main character in the campaign in this, in effect, the main character in the book, married a woman who is a literary agent who represents that kind of fiction. And now she's my agent. Like that. I just trip out on that.
Man, that's exciting though. That if you can get that actually published and pushed out there, obviously you've spent a long time building this world. And again, last week we had a chance to talk to a guy that covered Game of Thrones. Speaking of world building, the potential now, Hollywood is desperate for stories to put into film because the writers they have either can't produce anything interesting or they just feel like, well, why would we even try? Let's go to the comic book store, get a story that's already built, and make a movie out of it.
Yep. No, that's exactly right.
Now they need to, or young adult novel for that matter. Yes, that's another area that they fish quite regularly.
For sure.
Is this a new development? Because I don't think when we spoke about this last year, you had gotten this far with the book and getting representation.
This is pretty recent. So
nice.
She is trying to shop it around. It's a hard time to be shopping young adult fantasy because that market has just, post Harry Potter, post Hunger Games, the market's just flooded with people who are like, oh, he's a plucky young adventurer who discovers a magical world, and it's like, it's hard to get away from that. And if you have anything that even remotely sounds like that in a pitch, like that's a tough sell. Yeah. So I've tried to decide whether it's young adult or whether it's, adult fiction for people who, are really into escapist fiction. But my agent says it's definitely young adult, and like that's the market to target. And her attitude is, the market's flooded and the timing might not be great, but a good story is going to win out. So she's more bullish about it maybe than I am. But in the meantime, I'm writing other stuff. Just she is my agent. She'll shop around whatever I write. So I'm trying to come up with something that's different. Very different.
Hey,
that's awesome.
Got a couple things lined up.
Teen Wolf was made in 21 days in the midst of a market that was flooded with teen comedies, right? I mean, like
but not teen werewolf comedies.
But plenty of werewolf movies. I think they pointed out. They pointed out quite a few. They had Wolven. They had Teen Wolf. Obviously, Teen Wolf 2 came after that. But then you had a number of other Silver Bullet,
American Werewolf in London.
American Werewolf in London. Plenty of So it was in a sort of a flooded market of both teen movies and also werewolf movies. It just happened.
Very true.
Yeah, let's just talk about how, as we're listing off werewolf movies, the last one that we list is American Werewolf in London, while Teen Wolf 2 got a mention way before. Wow.
Whoa. Well, whoa. It's like so weird. I don't understand.
It was the first one. It was the first one I mentioned, for the record. Keith rattled off a list of very subpar werewolf movies. I had to interrupt him to say, and American Werewolf in London. So, for the record.
For the record, I have been on a streak of watching really bad movies in the past year. Like every Saturday night, there's a bad movie on my television. So, sorry, that's just where my brain automatically goes to now. It's a punishment. It's a punishment to myself. I don't know why I do it, but I do.
That's incredible.
Awesome.
So, looking at the timer, gentlemen, I believe we have hit the lightning round.
Lightning round. Fun stuff. So this is a segment of the show where we basically ask the same 3 questions of all the guests. And at some point, I don't know, we'll do something with it. I'm not quite sure. But it's still kind of fun to ask the same 3 questions because all of our guests are so different. So are you ready for the lightning round?
Sure.
All right. How do you think your hobbies have contributed to your success in your full-time work?
Well, I've sort of been able to manipulate my jobs into leveraging the stuff that I want to do. That was one thing that I was really lucky with in my current job, was that I was hired to do one thing and I was able to sort of manipulate it into being what I wanted to do. So I've always been had pretty good luck with that. I think as a storyteller, storytelling, you can leverage storytelling in a lot of different places, and in fact you should. So, in effect, I'm making, short films when I do these videos, and it's easy enough to put a product in a video setting and just tell the product story, but that's not storytelling. And so if you know how to tell an effective story, that comes out in business communications, any sort of industrial films. I mean, anything, you have to have, a human connection that comes from telling a good story. So I would say, playing with, Transformers toys when I was a kid and knowing the characters from the show and, faking their voices and having them act the way they would act in the show, telling new stories. Like, I started that stuff really early. So everything in my life has always been, story based. So.
Excellent. If you could be one fictional character, who or what would it be?
One fictional character. Oh man, that's hard. I think I would be Marty McFly. I like the idea of being cool and adaptable and having access to any time for as long as I wanted to be there. Go check a place out, take a quick tour and then move on to the next place. I wouldn't want to be Marty McFly with all of the paradox, fading away. My life is in danger. I've ruined my parents' relationship. I would just want to be a free agent traveling around. I think that would be pretty awesome. With or without Doc Brown, but probably with.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a second vote for Marty McFly. Amazing. What other interests would you like to pursue if time wasn't a constraint?
Pursuits. I'd probably write a lot more. It's really what I want to do. It's very hard to prioritize. I'm not the kind of person that can write in 10-minute increments. If I'm going to sit down and write, I'm going to write for 8 to 10 hours in a go and crank out 15 pages. So that's impossible to do with a schedule with a couple of kids and a full-time job. A lot of other demands on my time. So if I could do it, I would go off like James Caan in Misery, just go in a cabin and hang out and write for 4 months stretch straight. I think that's what I would like to do, I think.
Yeah, the trip back is kind of the hardest part for that particular metaphor.
Very hard on the ankles.
Very hard on the ankles. That particular one. Don't recommend it.
God.
Don't drive in the snow if you can. There's just so many things. There's so many warnings there to avoid.
I'm living in misery.
Awesome. Well, that is our lightning round for the week. Thank you for participating in that.
Sure.
So with that, Jim, I think we have hit time. And again, thank you for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure talking to you in the office. and not being able to see you 3 to 4 times a week has been a real bummer of this pandemic. So
I
Big
know,
bummer.
it's very sad.
Big bummer. We're definitely going to have you back for our Star Wars panel, though. We are definitely going to have that at some point.
I would love that. I'm there for it.
awesome. So
2 hours of Star Wars nerdiness.
it should be good. So we'll definitely, that should be happening pretty soon. We're getting to the point where a lot of the big Star Wars people have been on. So we need to bring it all back together. So we will definitely let you know. Maybe it'll be a New Year's show.
Engage.
Oh
wait, different universe. Sorry.
The Starman series. With that, thank you for joining, and catch you later.
That's good. Thanks for having me.
This has been the Austin Otaku Podcast. To learn more about us and our show, to be a guest, or to subscribe to our show, go to www.austinotaku.com and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.